Hey guys, TitanGoji here, and Rampage is just on the horizon, so I thought I would take this time to recommend non-Godzilla kaiju movies everyone should watch. This time, I will not be alone for this video, for I have invited Dillo Fellow, Kaiju Tony, Dr. Mifune, aka Kaoko and Patterson, and Kaiju Noir. Each of us will suggest several non-Godzilla kaiju movies everyone should watch. I'll start off with my recommendations, and the following are The Host. Just a beautiful film all around, very unique and very different too. The premise is that a tadpole is mutated by toxic chemicals and collects humans for a little feast. It also has probably the best human characters in any kaiju movie. There's a lot of focus on this family who has tried desperately to save this little girl who is a family member taken by the monster Guomul. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Daimajin. Another unique entry because it's a period piece too, and a really good one. It's made by Daiei, most famously known for the Gamera series, which unfortunately got more attention than a movie that's just so much better than any of those combined. It takes itself seriously, the action is great, and Daimajin himself is just incredible, even if you only see him in the last 20 minutes in every movie he's in. Attack on Titan. I'm honestly surprised at how these films are starting to get a cult following, otherwise I wouldn't have included it in this list. It's a very misunderstood, underrated, and underappreciated classic. It takes the influence tokusatsu movies like War of the Gargantuas and Godzilla vs. Biollante had on the manga, and pretty much makes a movie out of it. Yeah, I know it's different from the anime, but yet again, the anime isn't flawless either. It keeps the basics of the plot without straying too far. Characters like Sasha, Jean, and Hanji are very fun to watch. The soundtrack is amazing, and if you've seen my behind the scenes videos for this film, you can tell a lot of passion went into it. And the Titans. Oh my god, these are the best Titans ever. I will fight anyone who disagrees. Shinji Higuchi may be against live action, manga, and anime, but the man definitely deserves an A for effort for this one. Frankenstein Conquers the World. This is perhaps the best non-Godzilla kaiju movie ever made by Toho in the Showa era. The story, the characters, everything about it is just outstanding. It's also my personal favorite take on the Frankenstein monster. This version of Frankenstein is a heart affected by the bomb that hit Hiroshima and starts growing into a giant monster. I read something that described it as what Frankenstein would have looked like if it was born and not made, which perfectly sums up the design. Everyone talks about War of the Gargantuas and how great it is, which in fact is a great movie too, by all means check it out. But in all seriousness, you are really missing out if you haven't seen its predecessor, Frankenstein Conquers the World. Varan. This is without a doubt the most underrated Toho kaiju movie out there, in my opinion at least, and definitely needs to be exposed to more people. I know the Japanese version is very hard to find and the American version is more common but also pretty crappy, but if you can, please watch the Japanese version. It deserves some love. Varan is a fantastic kaiju, the effects are great, music is awesome, and Haruo Nakajima nearly had his testicles blown off on set. Yeah, Varan is a gem that deserves to be seen. Also, Varan creator Keizo Murasi is making a new kaiju movie titled Hell from Beyond the Fog. I'll put the Kickstarter link in the description, and everyone please support this project, I'm sure it would mean a lot to him. So those are my 5 picks for non-Godzilla kaiju movies everyone should watch, but don't just take my word for it, listen to what the others have to say.
Hey, my dudes! I'm Dillo Fellow, and here I'll be joining my good pal TitanGoji and others to recommend you the best of the best movies. So how about we kick it off right now? Rodan, 1956. What a great movie all around, truly a classic that will withstand time itself, just like the original Godzilla. This film was the first film featuring the iconic kaiju Rodan, but that's not the film's biggest achievement. Its biggest achievement is being an overall good monster film, and the first Japanese monster movie to be filmed in color. While the human characters aren't as interesting and memorable as what the original Godzilla had, they still give interesting dilemmas, such as the main character, Shigeru Kawamura, having amnesia and slowly has to develop his memory back so he can remember what happened and reconnect with his lover, Kaio. Also, by the way, the special effects are top notch, pristine. The suit looks great with its black, shadowy eyes and its cape-like wings. The puppetry, set design, and destruction is absolutely fantastic. If you want to see a monster film with an interesting character dilemma and fantastic special effects, I highly recommend this film. Check it out. King Kong Escapes. What a goofy movie. If I was an out-of-touch critic, I would probably slam this movie for being not really good. But the reason why I'm recommending this is purely based off entertainment value. It's a fun, cheesy romp truly to entertain. With the goofy premise, goofy consuit, and a goofy villain, this film is a fun time all around. It's fine if you don't like this film because it's too goofy, but to others who don't mind some cheese, definitely check this film out. It's worth the watch. Plus, you get to see the first film Gorosaurus was ever in, and a robot Khan, so that's worth the watch. Gamera, Guardian of the Universe. Is there really anything else to say about this movie? It's regarded by many to be one of the best kaiju films ever. It reboots the franchise in Gamera into being more compelling and interesting. The characters, story, special effects, music, cinematography, and editing is what you expect from a good film, and this film absolutely delivers. Not much else to say besides if you're a kaiju fan and you haven't seen it yet, I 100% absolutely recommend it. Troll Hunter, a lesser known kaiju flick that comes all the way from Norway. The film follows a group of Norwegian film students encountering an individual who kills trolls for the government. Pretty simplistic, but I don't want to give too much away. It's kind of similar to the South Korean film The Host because they're anti-government messages, but does it a lot more differently. If you don't mind found footage, you'll be experiencing one of the most interesting monster movies with some jaw-breaking set pieces and special effects. Check it out. A Monster Calls. Now this one is kind of stretching it, but it does have a giant tree monster in it, so I guess I can talk about it. This is a movie I've seen recently, and it is an emotional roller coaster from beginning to end, and the hits don't stop coming. I don't really cry from movies, but this was certainly a tearjerker for me. It has some amazing acting that really helps the film carry its message of letting go and coming to terms with the reality. Lewis McDougall, Liam Neeson, and Felicity Jones do amazing work with the roles and truly make this film one of a kind. Check it out, you won't forget it.
Hey there everybody, it's Kaiju Tony here, and I'd like to give a big thanks to my pal TitanGoji for inviting me to be a part of this collaboration. Now, allow me to share my picks. Mothra. I find it odd that Mothra is a fan favorite Godzilla monster, but not many people have seen the original Mothra movie. Maybe it's because the DVD release was rare, unlike most Godzilla movies that had DVD releases from Sony. As far as the story goes, you most likely already know what it is if you've seen Godzilla Mothra Battle for Earth or Godzilla Tokyo SOS. Fairies get abducted and exploited for money, and Mothra comes to the rescue by causing massive amounts of destruction. But it's done more effectively considering that the movie's focused on Mothra rather than 2 to 3 monsters. Even for the time, the special effects are pretty spectacular, even more than the Heisei Mothra when you compare their flight movement, and the miniatures are some of the most best looking ones in any Showa movie. The human characters are decent, although the one character that stands out the most is the villain Nelson. He's like a combination of Dr. Evil and Ajit Pai. Pacific Rim. What hasn't been said about this movie? For those of you who've been living under a rock these past 5 years, Pacific Rim is Guillermo del Toro's interpretation of the kaiju and mecha genre. Basically the highest form of human entertainment imaginable from one of the greatest visual directors of all time. The designs of the kaijus and Jaegers are amazing, and the fight scenes are even better. And not to diss the sequel Pacific Rim Uprising, the Jaegers seem to actually have some weight put into them and don't look like they're just made to be toys. My only main issue, which is the biggest criticism of the movie, is the story and characters. And I'll admit that some of the human characters could have been more developed, and it would have been more effective if Mako was the main protagonist, but if you're watching Pacific Rim and expecting a deep and complex story that's along the lines of Neon Genesis Evangelion, you're watching it for the wrong reasons. I highly recommend watching Pacific Rim if you're into kaiju, mecha, tokusatsu, and anime. Colossal. I never thought I'd be talking about this movie in a video. I remember coming into a theater thinking that this would be a silly comedy, but boy was I wrong. Not to say that this movie didn't have any comedic aspects put into it, far from it, but it delves into more mature subject matter. Most of the characters seem to be developed enough to the point where you can either relate or understand their issues, especially since every character is a flawed individual. If you're gonna watch it for the monster action, you're probably gonna be disappointed since this movie is more focused on the human characters rather than the monster and the robot, but most of the plot revolves around what Gloria and Oscar do and how they control their monsters. Think of it as the anti-Pacific Rim, where in that movie, the monster and robot fights were the main highlight, while in Colossal, the movie is centered on the humans. Ultraman the Next. You know, it's not too often that a tokusatsu superhero gets a big budget summer blockbuster of a movie, considering that most of the time they feel like extensive episodes or made for TV movies, but Ultraman the Next took a different route. Instead of being a part of a previously established series, it had its own story. As far as the plot goes for this movie, it's more or less a remake of the original Ultraman's origins, but with a completely different cast of characters and a more dark and gritty tone. The biggest highlight of this film is when Ultraman finally grows 50 meters and fights the One, who looks like a cross between Ghidorah and Destroya. Not to mention that Ultraman's design in this movie is amazing. While the miniatures and suitmation is fantastic, the CGI looks like something out of a PS2 game. Thankfully, the soundtrack makes up for it with its hard-rocking epic tunes. The movie eventually spawned the series Ultraman Nexus, which is one of my favorite Ultraman series of all time. If anyone is looking forward into getting into Ultraman aside the 1966 series, I highly recommend this movie and its show. Also, if you want something to laugh at, check out the English Malaysian dub of this movie. Sometimes their accents are so thick you can't even understand what they're saying.
The first monster/kaiju film I like to talk about and recommend is the 1957 classic The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. The movie is already considered a classic by many and probably considered one of, if not the best, of all of Ray Harryhausen's films. And I feel it's a film that gets often overlooked by younger generations of monster or kaiju fans. Honestly, this is just a great film all around. The pacing, the brilliant effects, and the wonderful score by Bernard Herrmann of Psycho fame, and the likable characters' well-done performances. It's very hard for me to find fault with this film. As to be expected, Harryhausen brings his A-game to this film, creating some of the most iconic stop-motion creatures ever presented to the silver screen. Overall, this is a film that every kaiju or monster fans should see. It's just the perfect adventure film that truly stands the test of time. Next up is another American production of a much more maligned and, in my opinion, rather unfairly treated film. I'm of course talking about the 1976 Dino De Laurentiis produced remake of King Kong, directed by John Guillermin. When this movie is brought up, it's mostly in a negative light, which to be honest I find rather unwarranted. Most of it is directed toward the fact that this is a remake of such a classic film that it is almost a sin to do so and change so much of that original movie for this remake. First off, the casting, characters, and acting I feel are all very good. Jeff Bridges is likable as always as Jack Prescott, a character that I feel is probably the best version of the Kong male lead archetype. Charles Grodin is also good as the new updated Denim type, the villainous Fred Wilson. Wilson is of course a very sinister villain and we all want to see his comeuppance, but at the same time he's very funny and enjoyable to see. And perhaps the most underrated performance of the film is of Dwan by Jessica Lange in her first major role. Jessica really nails her performance here, able to convey feelings of fear and sympathy for Kong, and really delivers a sad performance in the film's climax. The script by Lorenzo Semple Jr., best known as the writer of the Batman TV show and 3 Days of the Condor, updates the Kong stories 1970s in a very well-done fashion, injecting in some new themes of environmentalism and contemporary government and company mistrust, reflective of the cynical mood of the 1970s cinema after Vietnam and Watergate. The music by John Barry, best known for the James Bond franchise, is, in short, superb. It has all the majesty, terror, foreboding, and beauty a Kong film deserves. John Barry brings his A-game to Kong, producing a score that easily ranks up as one of the best in the entire genre. John Guillermin's directing is also top-notch, as is the stunning cinematography by Richard H. Klein. And finally, King Kong himself, with the combined efforts of legendary effects wizards Rick Baker in his first major production, and Carlo Rambaldi, Kong is portrayed via a man in a suit that would be able to convey a numerous array of emotion, giving Kong a much more humanized side and a more, in my opinion, sympathetic portrayal. I feel this film is very underappreciated and gets far too much hate. Many kaiju fans love both of Toho's Kong films, and I really don't see why, if those get love, why can't this film? While I still prefer the 1933 version of the film, I feel this version is nonetheless a very well-made film that deserves far more love.
King Kong Lives gets something of a bad rap, often listed as among the worst monster movies ever made, and derided by both Kong and Godzilla fans. It's easy to see that this is universally disliked, and yet after watching it recently after many years, I honestly don't think it deserves such a bad rap. I can personally understand why fans of the 1976 remake would dislike it. A lot of people seem to think the premise is ridiculous for Kong, artificial hearts, female Kong, etc. And to that I say, well, isn't Kong something of an out there premise as it is? You could argue it's all about execution, which from there I can see the point, but that brings me to my next issue. A lot of people who lambast this movie for its ridiculousness are also fans of King Kong vs. Godzilla and King Kong Escapes. Not trying to bring those movies down or anything, but how are any of those less ridiculous than this? My point is, not to go further, that really King Kong Lives is no more weird or out there than a majority of the movies Kong has been in before or since. This film has a sort of adventure comedy vibe to it, and for the most part it takes itself rather lightly. Writer Ronald Shusett, yes, the same Ronald Shusett who wrote Alien and Total Recall, described the story as intending to be a sort of parody of action movies while at the same time being a sort of action movie. Something he heard was said about the writing process of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and through that process I can kind of see what he was going for, and I think that it really works here. The lead characters are fun and interesting. Brian Kerwin especially shines as the would-be adventurer. Linda Hamilton also does a good job here, though admittedly she doesn't have nearly as much fun moments as Kerwin does. Ashton is good as the villain, though his character is rather underdeveloped in his hatred for the great apes. The effects are admittedly a mixed bag at points. Once again, the Kong faces show a great range of facial emotion and the animatronics are great. That being said, the suits are in some places rather poorly used. The miniatures, with the exception of one rather fake-looking mini Lamborghini, are surprisingly well done, and the scenes in the forest and outdoors look pretty great. The score by John Scott is also really well done, having a very adventurous feel to it. It's very exciting and overall a worthy follow-up to John Barry's brilliant score for the 1976 film. The movie has a lot of great scenes and set pieces. The comedy from Brian Kerwin's character is rather charming, and the scenes of Kong and Lady Kong together, while admittedly can seem weird to the average viewer, are kinda sweet and even have a good comedic timing to them. Overall, I honestly don't think King Kong Lives deserves its bad rap. Yes, it has plenty of flaws, but it also has many great and good things about it. While I understand fans of the 1976 film feeling that this might be something of a letdown, let me propose an alternate way of looking at the film. King Kong Lives may be bad, but if it is bad in the best possible way.
The 1998 remake of Mighty Joe Young is probably among the most overlooked hidden gems of the American monster genre. Directed by Ron Underwood, most famous for directing Tremors, the film not only successfully combined fantastic visuals provided by Rick Baker with a stellar cast and a heartwarming and actually well-done story, but is in my opinion one of the few remakes that is actually better than the original. Like Ron Underwood's previous giant monster film Tremors, Mighty Joe Young has a lot of humor, mostly coming from Bill Paxton, but also a lot more emotion and heartfeltness here, probably due to the nature of the story. The cast has great chemistry all around, with Charlize Theron coming out as perhaps the best performer here. Rada Sebegia, apologies if I'm mispronouncing his name, is absolutely great as the villain Andre Strasser, chewing the scenery in every moment that he's on screen. Once again, the effects by Rick Baker and co. are absolutely fantastic. Some of, if not the best, ape effects I have ever seen on film, and still hold up to this very day. And the score by James Horner is also beautiful and very much fits the film. Unfortunately, despite this combination of great talents and craftsmanship, Mighty Joe Young has fallen into somewhat of obscurity. This is likely due to it bombing at the box office at the time, likely due to Disney pulling advertising funding from it after another giant monster movie, the 1998 remake of Godzilla, had poor critical reception and underperformed in the United States. Most people have no idea this movie exists, and that's rather sad to me. I've always viewed this film in a very high regard, and even watching it recently, I still feel it really holds up to this day. Mighty Joong is honestly one of the most overlooked and underrated films of the genre. It's well directed, well acted, the story is good and heartfelt with great touches of humor all around. The music is great and the effects are, once again, amazing. If you haven't seen this film yet, I really recommend you do so. I think any fan of giant monster movies, or just really good, well-made, heartfelt movies, would really enjoy this film. Yamato Takeru is based on an ancient Japanese legend concerning a prince, and I'm assuming some parts of it are rather loosely based with this movie's regard, considering from what I've read compared to the actual film. The movie tells the tale of a Japanese prince named Yamato Takeru, played by Masahiro Takashima from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla and Gunhead. The prince is birthed under suspicious circumstances, and the movie chronicles his journey to redemption, taking on various armies, warriors, creatures, monsters, and later meeting and falling in love with the sorceress named Oto Tachibana, played by Isaku Sawaguchi from Godzilla 1984 and Godzilla vs. Biollante, and culminating with a final battle against the evil Tsukiyomi, played by Hiroshi Abe, before he would star in films like Chocolate and Godzilla 2000 Millennium. Yamato Takeru could be best described as a Clash of the Titans-esque story done in the style of 90s Toho special effects. This brings us to an aspect that could either be seen as a very big negative or something entertaining. It does nonetheless create a very unique aesthetic and style to the film, which I honestly kinda dig. The characters are rather standard for the genre. You have our lead, who takes the role of the young prince warrior seeking to fulfill his destiny, his love interest, who is a rather interesting character. Rather than being a damsel in distress role, Oto has sorceress abilities and can fight for herself. The other character of note is the villain Tsukiyomi. Though he doesn't speak much throughout the film, Hiroshi Abe has a fantastic screen presence and conveys a great sense of villainy and evil, easily the best and most memorable performance of the film. Masahiro Takashima is just okay here as the lead. He does a alright performance, but he might be the weakest link here. While Isaku Sawaguchi is rather good, you can tell that she has become a much more confident actress and become more comfortable with this craft since debuting in Godzilla 1984 10 years prior to this. The highlight of the film is the battle between the 8-headed dragon Orochi and the godlike warrior Itsuno Ikusagami. Orochi is a rather cool creation, exhibiting a wide range of neck movements. I imagine this thing must have took about as much wire works as Biollante, and even if not that much, I imagine quite a bit of wire works. Utsuno Ikusagami fares a bit better, though he honestly looks like he was put together from leftover parts from Mechagodzilla 1993. Nonetheless, his design is still pretty cool. Yamato Takeru was made at the same time as Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, so admittedly Kawakita was probably stretched pretty thin. And while it's obvious that this film suffered more as a result of this, the effects are still rather good. I would say at least better than, say, Godzilla vs. Destroya and Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, though probably a bit below the other 90s Godzilla efforts. Lastly, I want to talk about the music for the film, because it is pretty good. Kyoko Ogino provides a memorable score. The best pieces, in my opinion, are the main theme and the theme of the final battle with Orochi. Yoko Kanno, best known for Cowboy Bebop, is also credited as a composer by some sources, though I'm not too sure if it's a collaborative effort, since the album seems to just list Ogino as the main composer. Nevertheless, it is a great soundtrack. Overall, Yamato Takeru is a very flawed, but overall very entertaining adventure kaiju film. While I would say it isn't as well written as other tokusatsu fare like Mothra or War of the Gargantuas, nor as visually opulent or interesting as something like Gunhead, Yamato Takeru is still a very fun and entertaining film that I would recommend to fans of the kaiju genre, as well as mythological adventure films.
Hello people of the internet, this is KaijuNoir, and as TitanGoji mentioned, we're here to give our own personal recommendations to several giant monster movies that you may not be so familiar with. However, rather than going over feature-length films from the likes of Toho or Daiei, I'll mostly be taking a look at the indie side of the genre and spotlight some short films that deserve more attention. Number 5. Negadon, the Monster from Mars. This short film has the distinction of being one of the few animated projects that was able to capture both the melancholy tone as well as the zany, over-the-top feel of a 60s era Toho movie. Negadon takes place in 2025 in a retro-style futuristic Japan, where we follow a retired scientist who must save the Earth from an ancient Martian creature known as Negadon, using a giant robot that he and his deceased daughter created 10 years prior. Despite the film's 20-minute runtime, the filmmakers packed a lot of heart and soul into the story as we see this man's path towards redemption. The action wonderfully takes advantage of the CG animation by providing a thrilling scope, dynamic camera angles, and unique designs for the mech and kaiju that probably wouldn't have worked as well in live action. The cherry on top of this cinematic sundae is the Showa 100, a technique the filmmakers used to replicate the look and feel of an old Japanese film from the 60s, which included desaturated colors and artificial film scratches. Overall, if you're looking for a fun yet surprisingly emotional take on the kaiju genre, look no further than Negadon. Number 4. Deep Sea Monster Reigo vs. Battleship Yamato. Now, if you're as big of a Gamera fan as I am, then you've probably heard of a fan film by the name of Gamera 4 Truth, the holy grail of all kaiju movies. Did you know that the director, Shinpei Hayashiya, created an original series of giant monster flicks? The first of his planned trilogy was Deep Sea Monster Reigo vs. Battleship Yamato. Taking place in the middle of World War II, the story follows the crew of the legendary Yamato battleship as we witness a supposedly untold story of their battle with a massive sea monster that goes to war with them after they kill their offspring. While some may skip this movie due to its low-budget CGI effects, which admittedly aren't all that great, I can't help but applaud the originality of this film, as we haven't really seen a period piece like this within the giant monster genre, which is ironic when you compare this to its sequel, Deep Sea Monster Raiga, which took things in a much more traditional direction while also turning the movie into a comedy. Despite its shortcomings, everything here is top-notch, from its practical effects to its monsters, both Reigo and the Bonefish, to the cast that gave believable and thrilling performances that help you look past the shaky digital effects. Check this one out if you have the chance, especially since the last installment of the trilogy, Deep Sea Monster Raiga vs. Lava Beast Olga, is supposedly premiering at G-Fest within the next few years. Number 3. Daikaiju Eiga G. Of all the films I'm covering, this one is by far the most obscure. In fact, I came across this movie accidentally back in 2011 on G2K Master's old blog when I was researching the film I have placed at number 1. This film follows two friends that were veterans of a nondescript war. One went on to become a mechanical engineer, while the other became a chemist, each developing new methods of defending Japan and putting an end to war. However, the chemist ended up injecting himself with his experimental super soldier serum and ended up mutating into the unstoppable monster G. With all hope nearly lost, our engineer uses his experimental giant robot to combat his dear friend and put an end to the chaos. This film in particular is perhaps one of the most inspiring pieces of media I've ever encountered, as it's probably the lowest budgeted monster movie I've seen, with some of the most ambitious set pieces behind it. It was probably a smart decision for the filmmakers to shoot everything on a cheap looking camera, since it would have allowed them to focus all their efforts on the suits, models, green screen effects, pyrotechnics, and CG animation. It also has to be mentioned that this is perhaps one of the bloodiest kaiju films in history. If you consider yourself a fan, especially one who aspires to be a tokusatsu filmmaker, I implore you to track this movie down. Number 2. The Super 8 Ultra Brothers. Now, if you're a fan of Japanese monster media, there's no doubt that you've heard of Ultraman. If you're interested in getting into the franchise, here's the movie for you. The film takes place in the real world, where Ultraman is just a fictional character in a long-running TV show. The main character, Daigo, along with his friends, watched the show as kids and grew up to live mundane lives. However, all that changes when he meets Ultraman Mebius, the most current Ultraman at the time of this film's release, as he traveled to their world to fight an evil set of villains that wish to take advantage of the real world's power of imagination. By that point, Daigo and his friends and allies all use said power to each become an Ultraman that they grew up with. What I love the most about this film is how it focuses on the idea of never giving up your ambitions while preserving as much as you can of that wide-eyed enthusiasm as you strive to leave a lasting impact on the world. What's also great for Ultraman fans is that Daigo and his supporting cast in the real world are all played by actors from past Ultraman shows. Even if you're a newcomer, I feel like the Super 8 Ultra Brothers does a fine enough job at slowly introducing you into the wide world of Ultraman, by portraying characters that grew up with it and show how it affected them, albeit in an exaggerated and fantastical way. Once you see these heroes, monsters, and villains in action, it'll probably get you to check out some of the shows they came from. In the end, if you're looking for some ultra content, look no further than this film. Number 1. Gihara, the dark and long-haired monster. What happens when you take the talented director behind TitanGoji and give him a modest budget to produce a 20-minute TV special? You get the best damn kaiju love letter of the 2000s. I consider Gihara to be the go-to standard for modern-day tokusatsu kaiju films, as it not only works as a hilarious parody, but it also works at being an action-packed film. If you're someone who has seen the majority of the Godzilla franchise, and even a good chunk of Toho's other works, you'll find yourself an assortment of hidden Easter eggs that encapsulate the history of kaiju cinema. The film follows a monster-obsessed journalist who investigates a series of disappearances that is quickly discovered to be caused by the monster Gihara. From that point on, the military must do what they can to put an end to the beast's rampage. It's short, sweet, and to the point. When it comes to kaiju parodies, I feel like the majority of these films either suffer from cartoonish humor that has no connection to the genre they're lampooning, or have humor that comes from a mean-spirited viewpoint on said genre. Gihara thankfully has neither of these issues. Everything is kept tongue-in-cheek as the characters felt both believable and charming in this exaggerated Showa-esque world. You can see why the director, Kiyotaka Taguchi, went on to work on the recent Ultraman shows, starting with Ultraman Ginga, as well as all of their tie-in movies. If you'd like to see what a properly done kaiju parody/tribute is like, do yourselves a favor and track down Gihara, the dark and long-haired monster. My top recommendation to all fans of giant monsters cinema.
Before I end this video, here are some honorable mentions. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. I really hope we helped shed some light on films other than Godzilla movies, and we hope we inspired you to check them out. Feel free to check out these other guys too. Links to their channels will be in the description, and be sure to share, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And see you next time.